I don't think we should keep the carbon tax that the federal government has.
We were able to find a clip of Christy Clark talking about her beloved carbon tax in BC from 9 years ago.
Let's take a look. We haven't weighed in too heavily on the Liberal leadership candidates, but when it came to former Liberal Premier of BC, Christy Clark, talking about scrapping the carbon tax, we just had to jump in on this one.
Let's take a look.
Christy Clark, do you believe in carbon taxes?
I don't think we should keep the carbon tax that the federal government has. I think that the Trudeau carbon tax isn't working. It's very different from what we did in British Columbia and what Gordon Campbell introduced in our province. You know, when I was the Premier of British Columbia, we took that carbon tax that had a series of automatic increases, and we got to about $30 in my tenure. And I said, you know, I'm concerned, first of all, that this is starting to really impact families. And second, I was concerned that it was hurting our competitiveness with the rest of the country and therefore going to have an impact on people's jobs. So we froze the tax at that point. But I mean, I won't take the 15 minutes or 20 minutes it would take to explain exactly how it was different, but it was very different from what the Trudeau government has implemented in a carbon tax. And should I be elected leader of the party and Prime Minister of the country, we would scrap that tax.
Are you going to offer an alternative plan to drive down emissions, though?
Absolutely.
Well, that's concerning.
So...
It sounds like she just wants to scrap Trudeau's carbon tax, but is saying that the carbon tax that we had in BC was very successful and blah, blah, blah.
Well, but, okay. I think it's interesting how she said, well, you know, it'd take me 15 or 20 minutes to explain the differences between the carbon tax. But even that, she was like, oh, well, you know, it was getting too high and all this. So, and we were concerned it was hurting families. We were concerned that it was hurting our competitiveness. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we were able to find a clip of Christy Clark talking about her beloved carbon tax in BC from 9 years ago.
Let's take a look.
One province has had success with its carbon tax, but as our chief political correspondent Tom Clark is here to tell us, there's major opposition from our federal government. Tom?
If there's one thing that the federal Conservatives here in Ottawa despise almost more than anything else, it's the idea of a carbon tax. You hear it from them all the time, saying that a carbon tax will kill jobs and destroy the economy. And in the coming election, they will say that the Liberals and the NDP will bring in such a destructive carbon tax. Well, meanwhile, on the west coast of this country, British Columbia, where that provincial government has just brought in a $900 million surplus, BC Premier Christy Clark is not only singing the praises of her carbon tax, but is saying that she may increase it because it is so effective.
So
it's so effective, I might increase it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Tom Clark, who is the embroiled in the $9 million condo scandal with Justin Trudeau. That was an accident that he was included in this. But isn't it interesting? And isn't it interesting how he was saying, oh, the Conservatives are saying this is all going to happen. Well, gee, look what happened.
Right, Stephen Harper was right again. Again.
Like.
It's like the man knew what he was talking about.
Yeah, almost like he was qualified to be the Prime Minister of the country.
Right. But, Canadians want to legalize marijuana.
And then they're saying, oh, the carbon tax is so great in BC that they're going to increase it because it's so effective. Didn't Christy Clark just say that it was starting to hurt families and it was starting to drive out jobs? Well, wait a minute. Isn't that what the Conservatives were saying, that Tom Clark was just saying?
But if something's efficient, why would you change it? Especially, why would you change it in an upward direction?
Right.
Like, why would you increase the carbon tax if it's working? Like, that does not make sense to me.
Anyway, let's get back to Christy Clark of 9 years ago.
But before she does that, she says certain conditions have to be met. But she says she's very close to meeting those. Take a listen.
For us, if there was a next step, and we're not there yet, that's where we would go.
Increase the carbon tax.
Well, it's worked. It's worked. That's the thing about it. And, I think cap and trade is an alternative to that. But I think most of the evidence around the world would tell you that it's a pure carbon tax that is revenue neutral. I can't leave that part out. That really makes the difference.
Premier Clark went on to say that, in her view anyway, Ottawa has given Canada a real black eye around the world when it comes to the environment, which is why she says most, if not all, premiers will be going to Paris in November of this year to the International Climate Change Conference, and it'll be the premiers telling Canada's story, which she says is going to be a lot more palatable than what the world has been hearing from the federal government.
Gee, it's almost like Tom Clark doesn't like the Conservatives. It's almost like Tom Clark has thrown his lot in with the Liberal Party of Canada.
What makes you say that?
Oh, gee, I don't know. But did you hear what Christy Clark said? Oh, it's revenue neutral. Well, we've heard that one before.
Yeah, we know how revenue neutral the federal one is, don't we?
So here's how different the BC carbon tax and the federal carbon tax is from what we've been able to find. Okay, so the BC carbon tax is put on all industry and consumer grade fuel. Okay, so that's the same. That's the same as the federal one. And they don't return all of your taxes to you. Okay, so that's the same as the federal one. They use that money to pay for other environmental programs. Sounds similar to what the federal one does, well, environmental programs. And they say that it's revenue neutral and you can claim a tax break on it. Oh, and remember what Christy Clark said? Oh, it's different because there's automatic increases. Well, there's automatic increases on the federal one too. And both of them are set to have the same price per ton in 2030. So...
Oh, but Christy Clark stopped hers, didn't she?
Right.
It was getting too expensive for families, so she stopped it.
So if it's revenue... And this is the thing, folks. If it's revenue neutral...
How is it getting too expensive for families?
Right. If it doesn't hurt the economy, how is it getting too expensive for families? If it doesn't hurt anything, and it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, how is it hurting competitiveness? So... Like, hello?
I have to laugh at these politicians that are like, yeah, we need a green energy program in place and green. Build more nuclear plants. Unless you are talking about building nuclear, I cannot take you seriously because it is the cleanest and greenest energy source that we have. So why would you not make more of them so that all of our energy is coming from nuclear?
Well, and here's the other thing, right? It was only a matter of time before one of these Liberal candidates came in and said, scrap the carbon tax, because it's popular, right? And Christy Clark is sitting there saying, oh, well, Pierre Poilievre doesn't believe in climate change and blah, 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 and all this. But, let's go back to future Christy.
Unlike Pierre Poilievre, I believe that climate change is happening and that as human beings, we are part of the problem, and we need to address emissions. So absolutely, we want to make sure that Canada is playing the biggest role that it can in the world to contribute to the global, what's really a global problem. And I think that's going to be a very different approach from the Poilievre Conservatives. A carbon tax isn't the only answer to fighting climate change. There is a whole range of other tools in the toolbox, and we would be committing to figuring out which tools we want to put to work, but also with a mind to making sure that they aren't things that will hold people back, that will hurt our economy, that will kill jobs in the country. Because it is possible, and we proved it in BC when we had the fastest growing economy in the country and a carbon tax in our province. We proved that you can find a balance between investment, growth, jobs, and making sure we're finding a way to fight climate change.
Wait, she just said and implied that the Trudeau carbon tax is hurting the economy and it's holding people back. But I thought the current Liberals were telling us that the economy is great and the economy is going to be booming and Canadians should be happy and that it's a vibe session.
They also tell us that the carbon tax is revenue neutral, but it's not. I mean, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, who I trust way, way more than I trust the Liberal government, has told us that it costs $200 million just to administrate it.
Yeah, and that's going to go up to an astronomical amount if it continued. So, she's saying, oh, well, like all the Liberals, I'm the one with the carbon tax answer. I'm the one with the carbon tax answer. And what it sounds like is it's exactly what Tanya said. She's like, well, we've proven in BC that you can have a carbon tax. It's just the way it is. So, yeah, she's going to scrap Trudeau's carbon tax, but I think Tanya's right. I think she plans to bring in a different carbon tax. And here's the other thing. She says, oh, well, Canada needs to be a world leader in contributing to the world problem. All of these people, again, I'm just accepting for the sake of argument, you don't have to worry about it, that fine, let's accept that people are the majority cause of climate change because of carbon emissions. Let's just accept it for the sake of argument. Christy, what are you going to do to stop China from producing 20 to 25% of all these emissions? What are you going to do to stop India, who's number 2 or 3 on the list? What are you going to do to stop the United States? What is Canada seriously going to do?
Like I said, we need to build nuclear, and then we need to export our liquid natural gas to other countries who maybe are using coal. And then when, they build the technology and they can work with the LNG, eventually we help them build nuclear. Nuclear is the way of the future. Politicians just don't like talking about it because it has a bad PR problem.
Yeah, and eventually, when it's ready, it will be fusion. But that is still decades away.
But the nuclear that we have now is efficient and it's safe and it's green. Nuclear is the safest method of energy production, even safer than wind and solar.
Yeah, and they're in the process of retrofitting the Darlington plant right now. So, hello? Things are going just fine in Canada from an environmental perspective. Can you always do better? Sure. But not that anyone on this channel is going to fall for it, but Canadians need to not fall for this bait and switch language that Christy Clark and the other Liberals will use. They're like, oh, well, Trudeau did it wrong. And even though every single politician in Trudeau's government was coming out and saying, oh, the carbon tax is great and it's putting more money back in your pocket, blah, 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 and it has no effect on the economy. Now you have a Liberal who's trying to run for prime minister and was basically like, oh, yeah, I was hurting the economy. I was holding... What?
So who's right?
Right?
But the thing is, Christy Clark is saying that the Trudeau carbon tax is harming the economy and it's hurting families, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but thinks hers is so much better.
The Christy Clark carbon tax special, apparently, and again, they always have the answer, right? They always have the answer, but this is where Canadians need to say, you know what? No, I'm done.